Section 4 of The Romance of an Old Fool. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Romance of an Old Fool by Roswell Field. Section 4. In the very nature of things, it was necessary that I should return frequently to Meadowvale, to confer with the village committee and make all proper arrangements for beginning so important a local enterprise. While this put an end to my projected trip to Europe, I accepted the situation with calmness and forbearance, satisfied that in the pursuit of duty and in giving happiness to my fellow creatures, I should have the reward of an approving conscience. To my nephew, Frederick Grinnell, I gave the task of preparing the plans, and his excellent suggestions were cordially adopted. Much of my spare time, and it is amazing how much spare time one has in a village, was spent at the Eastman cottage with my new daughter, and in the evening I talked to her of the world outside, quite, I fancy, as Othello may have spoken to Desdemona, but with a more conservative and a better impulse. I unfolded to her the wonders of great London, the pleasures of Paris, the beauties of Venice, the sacred mysteries of Rome, the noble traditions of Athens. I journeyed with her up the Nile and down the Rhine. One night we were in gay Vienna, another in Berlin, a third in the grandeur of the Alhambra. From the fjords of Norway to the tea-houses of Japan was the journey of a few minutes, and the indifference of my surfeited life gave way before the kindling enthusiasm of this lovely country girl, whose world had been the area of scarcely more than a township. But the paternal relation, however honest and commendable my intentions, did not seem to thrive as I had fondly hoped. Only in her teasing moments would this vivacious creature admit the solemnity of our compact, and when she called me Papa, there was always that gleam of the eye, with that merriment of tone, which may not have been disrespectful, but was certainly not filial. This troubled me exceedingly. I thought it all over, and one night I said to her, "My dear Phyllis, it has become only too evident that you do not entertain that deferential feeling for me which a daughter should have for a father. I shall not describe your emotions as I have analyzed them, but I am satisfied that we shall not make a complete success of my long-cherished plan. However, I am not prepared to withdraw unreservedly from my schemes for your comfort and happiness, and since you cannot look upon me as a father, or treat me like a father, I have another suggestion to offer. Let me be your elder brother, and watch over and guard you as a brother's duty should direct. There shall be no diminution of my love, no retraction of my promises. Perhaps, in the feeling that I am your brother, you will talk with me with greater frankness, and feel more closely drawn to me, and we shall be all the better and the happier for the change." Thus speaking, I took her pretty hand and carried it respectfully to my lips, at the same time patting it affectionately and assuring her of my brotherly devotion. And this incomprehensible girl threw back her head and laughed, then burst into tears, laughed again, flushed to crimson, and ran out of the room. I was grieved beyond measure. Had I done wrong so quickly and rudely to sever a connection so holy? Had the filial feeling been suddenly awakened in her breast? Was I depriving this poor child of a tender paternal care, for which she longed, but which maidenly coyness could not immediately accept? As a philosopher I have made women the subject of much research, and my library bears witness to the attention I have paid to the written opinions of the ablest writers and thinkers of all times who have had anything to do with this fascinating theme. I have seen her in all her phases, analyzed her in all her emotions, and Bunsey has admitted to me that my theoretical knowledge has been of great value to him in dealing subtly with his heroines. And yet, despite my complete equipment in mental construction, I am constantly surprised by a new development, a sudden and unaccountable phenomenon of feminine nature, which undoubtedly escaped the experience and reasoning of the experts and sages. It is indeed a matter of pride in woman that while man has studied her for thousands of years, she continues to exhibit fresh delights in her infinite variety of moods, and to put forth unexpectedly new and astounding shoots. I saw Phyllis no more that evening, save in my dreams, and it was wholly creditable to the goodness of my motives and the sincerity of my affection that she abided with me in my slumbering fancies with no protracted intermissions. The next day she was as sweet and gracious as ever, but I thought her tone a little constrained, and when, as a father or brother should, I ventured to speak of the tenderness of our family relation, a half-imploring look came into her beautiful eyes. And when I casually remarked on the softness of her hair, or the slenderness of her fingers, her glance was timidly reproachful. All this gave me great unhappiness, and I discovered to my further distress that in my attempt to return to the old familiar footing I was neglecting the committee and losing interest in the affairs of the library. A certain peevishness took possession of me. I was no longer myself, and I lost the gaiety and sprightliness which had been always my distinguishing virtues. Furthermore, I missed the companionship and solace of my books in this emergency, for I had no reference library to which I could go in Meadowvale for aid in establishing the true condition of this strange girl. I recalled dimly that somewhere on my shelves was a volume which contained a fairly analogous case, but while I knew that I possessed such a book, I could not remember the circumstances or the incident cited, and this added to my unrest. Only a student can understand the absolute wretchedness which overtakes a man when he finds himself miserably dependent on a distant library. For several days I gave myself up entirely to my mental depression, greatly wondering at the perplexing change in my life, and marveling that in all my explorations in philosophy I had not provided for just such a crisis, whatever it might be. One afternoon, as I sat in my room at the tavern, looking idly out of the window and across the little river which rippled by, something seemed to strike me violently in the forehead. It may have been a telepathic suggestion, it may have been a return to consciousness. At all events, it was an idea. I leaped from my chair, put on my hat, and proceeded rather feverishly to the Eastman cottage. Phyllis was away for the day. Mary was knitting in the sitting-room. I watched her in silence for a moment, and then I said abruptly, "Mary, I think I should like to marry Phyllis." Mary Eastman was not the type of a woman to lose herself or betray astonishment. She pushed her spectacles sharply above her eyes, looked at me sternly, and said in a rasping voice, "John Stanhope, don't be an old fool." "Whatever I may be, Mary," I answered, much nettled by her tone, "I do not think anybody can properly regard me as a fool. As for the other qualification," I went on complacently, "I am not so old." "You and Sylvia were the same age, and she would have been 48. "A man is as old as he feels," I ventured, finding refuge in a proverb. "That is evasive, and has nothing to do with the question. Beside, What reason have you to believe that Phyllis has the slightest desire to marry you?" "Frankly, not the slightest reason in the world," I replied with the utmost candor. "That is why I have been so bold as to speak to you on the subject." "Perhaps you thought I might use my influence to help you along?" "Quite the contrary, my dear Mary, I assure you. I may not know very much about women," I was quite humble when separated from my library, "but I do know that nothing is so fatal to a lover's prospects as the encouragement of the loved one's relations. You see that I am perfectly frank." "Then you wish my opposition?" "Come, let us be reasonable. I have told you I wish to marry Phyllis. I know my good points, and I am not unacquainted with my weak ones. Unhappily, I can figure out my age to a day. Alas, I am 48, and Phyllis is not yet 23. The difference is positively ghastly from a sentimental standpoint. But if I love her, and she is not hopelessly indifferent to me, I think that even that difficulty can be bridged. You know my position, my character, my general reputation. Neither of us knows what Phyllis really thinks, or what she will say or do in the matter. I do not ask either for your opposition or your good offices. I have come to you as an old friend, and the girl's nearest relative, to tell you exactly how I feel and what I wish to gain. And I ask only that I may have the same chance to win her affection that you might grant to a younger man." Mary's voice was gentler when she spoke again. "John," she said, "Phyllis is all I have in the world. It is my one idea to have her happily married to a worthy man whom she honestly loves. Providence, in inscrutable wisdom, may have decreed that you are that man, but," she continued with a sudden return of Yankee caution, "I have my doubts, considering your age. However, you have acted honorably in coming to me, and while I think Phyllis would be a better daughter than wife to you, I cannot speak for her. Remember that she is very young and very inexperienced. Her acquaintance with men has been slight. You are a man of the world, and with enough of the surface polish, I don't say it stops with that, to dazzle any girl accustomed to such surroundings as we have here. Undoubtedly, an offer from you would flatter her. It might induce her to accept you, thinking that she loved you. Be careful. Be sure of your ground before it is too late." As I walked back to the village, I mused on what Mary had said, but I felt no apprehension. Most lovers are alike in this, in youth, in middle age, in senility. Perhaps the advantage of middle life is that a man is more the master of himself, more in possession of the faculties necessary to carry him through a crisis. Without the impetuous desire of youth, or the deadened sensibilities of old age, he has a certain serene confidence that is a mixture of love and philosophy. It disturbed me somewhat to find with what equanimity I faced a situation which promised nothing. It really annoyed me to note that I was picking out mentally the place to which I should conduct Phyllis in order to have the harmonious environment adapted to a sentimental proposition. I remembered that down by the river, just beyond the willows, there was an old tree where Sylvia and I, so many years ago, had sat and talked of our lives before us. To that sacred spot I would lead Sylvia's daughter, and passing gently from the past to the present, I would tell her of my love and of my fondest hopes. How dignified and appropriate such a spot for a frank, calm, and self-contained avowal! Thus philosophically and amiably plotting, I walked contentedly along, and looking up, I saw Phyllis coming toward me, swinging her hat in her hand, and suggesting in her girlish beauty and graceful outline the poet's shepherdess. She did not see me, and yielding to a sudden impulse, I stepped quickly aside in the shadow of a neighbor's house, as she passed on with her eyes on the ground. I followed at a little distance, and discovered, much to my dismay, that she chose the road that led to the burying ground. Now, a cemetery is not at all the spot that a man, whatever his philosophy, would select for a tender declaration, but I was buoyed by the remembrance of Mary's words. "The finger of Providence may be in it," I muttered. "The Lord's will be done." Slowly up the winding path she walked, and I as slowly followed. When I reached her, she was standing at her mother's grave, just as she had stood the morning we first met. I tried to accept this as an omen, but failed miserably, and omens, after all, depend on the point of view. She raised her eyes, and, seeing me, blushed, another omen which means comparatively little to a man who is aware of the thousand emotions that are responsible for the blush of a woman. I was again annoyed by the discovery that my pulses were not beating wildly, and that my heart was not throbbing tumultuously, and when I addressed a commonplace remark to her, I was thoroughly ashamed and humiliated. It seemed like taking a mean advantage of innocence and inexperience. We sat together on the little bench, and for the first time in our acquaintance she appeared embarrassed, as if she knew what was passing in my mind. I have always believed that women, in addition to their acknowledged intuition, have a special sense that enables them to anticipate a declaration of passion, and I had no doubt that Phyllis was fully prepared for my confession, in spite of her embarrassment. This induced me to proceed to the point without unnecessary preliminaries. "Phyllis," I said, not without a certain agreeable ardor, "I have been talking with Aunt Mary." "Indeed." "And about you." "Really?" "When I say that I have been talking with Aunt Mary, and about you," I continued in a grieved tone, for I do not like jerky responses, "I wish you to understand that it was in connection with no ordinary topic." "Phyllis," I spoke with the utmost tenderness, "can you not guess the nature of our discussion?" Phyllis was equal to the emergency. Her embarrassment had disappeared. "I am glad," she said, "that your conversation so far as it related to me was out of the ordinary. I suppose I may ask what the topic was, that is, if you don't mind telling." This was approaching the serious. "Phyllis, I was telling Aunt Mary that I loved you, and wished to make you my wife." A flash, half merry, half angry, came to her eye. "That was thoughtful of you. Is it customary for gentlemen in the city, when they think they love a girl, to honor all her relations with their confidence before they speak to the girl herself?" I took her hand. She made the slightest motion to withdraw it, and permitted it to remain in my grasp. "Phyllis," I said with all earnestness, "do not misunderstand me. I sought you at the house. You were absent. Your Aunt Mary and I have been friends from childhood, and it was only natural that out of my heart I spoke the words that were in my mind. I told her that I loved you, just as at that moment I might have shouted it from the housetop. My heart was full of you, and I had to speak. Can't you understand?" The girl was still obdurate, and she spoke with some petulance. "If that is the case, perhaps it is just as well that it was Aunt Mary, and not one of the neighbors." "Dear little Phyllis, you are not angry with me because I love you. You cannot remain angry with me because I confessed my love before I met you today? If you had only seen with what applications of cold water your aunt rewarded my confidence, you would pity and not reproach me." For a minute the girl was silent. Then she asked softly, "How long have you known that you loved me?" "Must I answer that question candidly and unreservedly?" "Unreservedly and candidly." I seized her other hand and held her firmly. "About 50 minutes." She laughed, rather joyously, I thought. "And having loved me for fully 50 minutes, you wish to make me your wife? Confiding man!" "Little girl," I said tenderly, "let us be serious. If my dull consciousness did not awaken till an hour ago, my heart tells me that I have loved you ever since I first saw you standing near this spot. I am not going to ask you now whether you love me, or ever can learn to love me. It is happiness enough for me today to know how much I love you, and to know that I have told you of that love. I do not care to have my dream too rudely and too suddenly dispelled. Very probably you do not care for me as I should like to have you care for me, but do not make a jest of my affection. I am wholly aware of the preposterousness of my demands in many respects." This sounded very conventional and commonplace, but every lover must say it. "And believe me, I shudder when I think of what I have dared confess." Then she said, with the most delightful demureness, "Mr. Stanhope, is it likely that a girl would sit in a burying-ground on a bench with a gentleman, allowing him to hold both her hands, unless she cared for him a little, just a little?" Up to this moment I had fairly forgotten that I was depriving her of all power of resistance, but with such encouragement I took an even more sympathetic grasp, and sat a trifle closer, while the minutes ticked away. A robin flew down from the tree near by, and saucily hopped toward us, until at a rebuking call from his mate he flew away, and I fancied that I could hear them talking over the situation, and drawing conclusions from their own happiness. Phyllis was the first to break the charming spell. "Mr. Stanhope," she asked, hardly above a whisper, "what did Aunt Mary say when you told her that you wished to make me your wife?" "She said, Phyllis, that Providence may have decreed that I am the man to bring you happiness." And still in that same enchanting whisper, with her face a little rosier, as she half hid it below my shoulder, "Mr. Stanhope, do you think that a girl with my Christian training could fly in the face of Providence?" End of section 4. Recording by Roger Moline.